Hello. Now we're going to talk about the main line in the Philidor with the fifth move bishop c4. After the starting moves e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight f3, knight bd7. Finally, we're going to see bishop c4, which is also the most played move. White is threatening knight g5. Basically, the bishop on c4 is active and it's aiming at the weakness on f7. And of course, we need to parry this threat of knight g5 with the bishop e7. At the same time, it's important to continue our development. And now we want to castle, and f7 will be protected. And here, white has many options. We're going to see a4, then the sacrifice on f7, bishop f7, knight g5 is also there. G4 is a blunder, but we're going to see it as well. H3, d takes e5, introducing then ideas of bishop f7 or knight g5. And finally, castle, which is, of course, the main move in the position. Now, a4, this is a very typical move for the Philidor. White is trying to get some space on the queen side. And here, it's important to just continue the development with castle. And attention, don't go for a5, because this is playing into white's hands. He can go knight g5, and then after castle, now there is bishop f7, rook f7, knight e6, queen e8, knight c7, queen d8, and knight a8. And this wins for white because the knight on 8 will not be trapped. White can play knight b5 and free up this knight. So this is the difference. It's actually a huge difference to have the pawns on a4 and a5. But we go castle. We avoid all these tricks. Now we're going to see a5 and h3. h3 looks a bit strange. But white is trying to make this useful pawn moves before castling. Of course, maybe white wants to follow up with bishop e3. So I think it's good to take on d4. Queen takes d4 is the natural move. If knight d4, we just go knight c5, attacking the pawn on e4. And here it's a bit awkward for white that didn't castle yet, so there is no rook e1 available. So let's say queen d4. At the same time, white is defending the e4 pawn. Knight c5, we are just finishing the development, and here we can include afterwards bishop e6 or c6. Castle is the main move. Bishop f4 is another option, and you can find it in the model game. Model games is my game against Juhasz. I was black, so you can find it there. The idea is to go for the more ambitious long castle. But let's say castle, and then we go bishop e6, and it transposes to 7a4. e5 is the more principled move. If white starts with a4, why not keep on pushing the pawn? And here again we can open up the position because white is not yet fully developed. So it takes d4. Again, there is queen d4 and knight d4. But knight d4 doesn't make so much sense because then the e4 pawn is not defended, and we can immediately attack it. Now there is no rook e1 available since the king is on e1. White has to go something like f3, but this is weakening the a7 g1 diagonal. And here we can just prepare d5 after c6. White should castle as soon as possible, and we break the center right away with d5. E takes d5, c takes d5. We got an isolated pawn, but white weakened his king a little bit with this f3. Is not only the pawn on f3, but weakness on f2, let's say. And here we have useful moves. Let's say a6 could be one of them to fix this pawn on a5 and control b5 square. Also, rook e8 is there. And yeah, if we go a6, afterwards we can play even queen c7 and bishop d6 to put pressure on h2, but it's essential to include a6 first. The position is balanced, but I like black's chances here. Queen d4 looks more logical just to keep the e4 pawn defended. Now we follow up with knight c5. Just continuing the development. Bishop g4 is an idea to attack the knight on f3. Let's say white is stopping this idea and by playing h3. Just want to mention that castle would transpose. So let's see h3. Now we go for this typical move c6. As you can see, black's play is very easy and you don't really need to remember much to play these moves. And after castle, well, if you black can go bishop e6 and it's totally fine, normal position. But knight c4 equalizes on the spot after knight takes e4, d5. It's better to go d5 straight away and not to take on e4. And yeah, we're going to regain the piece because of the fork. And if knight f6, there is bishop f6, again with the double attack on the queen and on the bishop. So this was a4. Now let's see some aggressive ideas. And the most direct is bishop f7. In the past, this was considered like an interesting option, but in the meantime, it turns out it's just a mistake. Black gets an advantage here. So we take the bishop, king f7, knight g5. This is the follow-up. Now the only move is king g8. We need to allow squares for the queen. So knight e6. This is white's idea. Queen e8 again forced. Knight takes e7. White has to go for it afterward. Otherwise, we go bishop d8 and we defend the c7 pawn. So knight c7. Now queen g6. The queen managed to get out, and most importantly, we are attacking the g2 pawn. And here white has to take a decision whether to take the rook but give the g2 pawn, or instead simply defend on g2. So we're going to see castle and knight a8. Castle, after castle, of course, the king is going to be safe, but white will be material down because we can also save the rook. And what else? What should probably try to use the initiative and open up the position with f4, but here we can go h6 to get the king to h7, then uh, this rook will be able to bring the rook into play as well, and white doesn't have enough compensation for the piece. It's 2 pawns, but we managed to stabilize the position, and it's a big deal to bring the king to safety. Knight takes a8. White at least takes some material, but now very important, queen takes g2. And from now on, the white king will be weak. This was a very important pawn. Rook f1. And now we open up the position with e takes d4, queen d4. Now we have to be careful because white is threatening this check on c4. But we can easily parry it, of course, with knight e5. Not only parrying the check, but on c4, but threatening decisive check on f3, a fork. White's only way to defend against this is f3. f4 is much worse because of knight fg4 followed by bishop h4. So then white loses because of the weak king. So f3 is the way to go to at least control the g4 square. But now we can go knight h5. Again, the threat is bishop h4. Rook f2 forced, bishop h4, king e2. And basically all these moves were more or less forced. But here you need to remember this important detail. Don't take the rook on f2. And instead queen g6 is much stronger. The thing is the rook is not going away anyway, but the bishop is defending the important square e7. So after knight d5 we are covered, and that's why we need to keep this bishop on h4. And now our idea is to go h6, king h7, rook f8 with a very large advantage here, maybe close to winning position. Okay, let's go back. This was bishop f7. And now white has another tactical idea here. Knight g5. Going for tricks early on. They don't work. Now f7 is under attack. We need to castle to defend the pawn. And okay, now the only way to justify this is to sacrifice the bishop on f7. Rook takes. Knight e6, this was the point. Queen e8. Knight e7. And now queen d8. It's important to control the c7 square so that the knight cannot go back. Well, there is no repetition with the knight e6 because the queen can go out to b6 or a5. So white has to take the rook. And here it's important to remember this move. We also tried it in some blitz games. And b5, this is strong. This is all you need to know actually, and black will get very good position and will fight for an advantage here. Um, Here the best move for white is to castle. In most of the games, they suddenly become concerned about the knight on a8 and they want to take on e5, but we can just take on e5 with the knight. And it's definitely not a good idea for white to open up the position because we have uh, more minor pieces. So castle is the better move. Bishop b7. Now we are ready to take the knight, but also we are targeting the e4 pawn. We need to think ahead, not just to take the knight. The knight will drop anyway, but if we manage to take e4, it's very important. Um, White is securing the e4 pawn, and now he wants to block the position with d5. And here, okay, we go b4. Queen takes a8 just to take the pawn is also fine, but b4 is a bit more ambitious. 92 and then just d5, so white cannot block the position. So what happens is we want to open up the game, and then we'll have two pieces for the rook. Okay, for the rook and two pawns. Um, for sure, the knight on 8 is not going to get out. Okay, we'll lose one tempo to take it. And here, white really needs to be precise to avoid getting into a bad position. So this line is actually tricky for white. White needs to be precise to stay in the game. But it's important to remember this move b5. G4 is actually a blunder. Sometimes they mix this system with the immediate G4 without bishop C4, and they want to try it here. But here it just doesn't work because of knight b6. And it's a double attack on the C4 bishop and the pawn on G4. And then we can take bishop G4 and we just pawn up. White has nothing to show for it. H3 is possible. It's always a useful move, but I don't think it's so necessary right now. However, it has the idea to go bishop e3. And then if we take on d4 to recapture with the bishop, it makes sense. Okay, we can just castle. Bishop e3, otherwise other moves would transpose. So bishop e3. C6 we can go. The idea is to play b5 and here white should obviously stop us from doing this. So a4. And it seems that white managed to get this bishop on e3. It wasn't possible in outer lines. Now there is an option to take with the bishop on d4. All is fine, but the white king is still in the center, and we can immediately equalize the position here with knight takes e4. Um, Knight takes e4 and d5. And because of this fork, we're going to take back the piece. Let's say white castles, giving us a choice on which piece to take. And we take on d4, queen d4. And here, okay, d takes e4 is a good move. But I like this knight f6, just not to be in a hurry to uh, regain the piece, but instead um, develop this knight. And of course, if white takes on f6, then there is bishop f6 again with a double attack, and this time we're going to take on c4. So this is h3. And now let's see d takes e5. This move has some idea. White wants to try the lines with bishop f7 or knight g5 and bishop f7 afterwards. But with this pawn trade before, which is a better version, of course, since afterwards we don't have options of e takes e4. And here, okay, the move we're recommending is d takes e5 just to keep the game more complicated. But if you really want to bail out and you don't want to uh, face these lines or remember the analysis, you can also take with the knight, knight e5, d5, queen d8, bishop d8. The endgame is just equal, but maybe that's the problem because it's too drawish. So, uh, so perhaps the game will end in a draw here. Then d takes e5 keeps the situation more complicated. And here, okay, if white doesn't do anything, the position is just equal and symmetrical. So we're going to see white's more ambitious attempts. Bishop takes f7 and knight g5 followed by bishop takes f7. We're starting with bishop f7. This is an interesting way to force the events. King f7, knight g5 check. And here, of course, the position is very concrete. And the only way for black to fight for an advantage is king g6. And actually, I like this move, and I think black should go for it because I was looking with Leon at this position. We analyzed it, and we didn't find any resources for white. But of course, the king can also be in danger on g6, so you're taking some risks. If you don't want to see some crazy lines over the board, you can still bail out with the king g8 here, and this leads to a almost equal position after knight e6, queen e8, knight e7, queen g6. This is similar to the other line, but now the trade on e5 favors white. So knight a8, queen g2, rook f1. Here we don't have e takes d4 option anymore. And this makes a big difference. Knight c5, we still want to go bishop h3. Queen e2. Bishop h3. But here the position is about equal. So, but also it's less risky for black. King g6, I mean, why not trying to play for a win or to fight for an advantage? And I really don't see a way for white to complicate matters here. We're going to see knight e6, f4, and also briefly discuss h4. If h4, we just go h5 to stop this h5 push, and then we want to continue with the knight b6. So let's say white goes knight e6, which is very tempting in order to take more material. Now, because we have the king on g6, there is a better square for the queen. Queen g8. Knight takes c7, let's say. If white goes a4, trying to be tricky. If we take on e6 to forecast with f5, but then we have h6, and the king will get to safety on h7, and then we just a piece up here. So knight c7. Now we can save the rook with rook b8. Queen f3, maybe to create some threats on the king, but the most precise move here is queen c4, and black is just a piece up. Now if white gives some check, the king can fall back to f7, and our queen is very active here. c7 knight is under attack. In practice, this position occurred and black played king f7 and still won easily because of the piece up. So 96 is not so good. Probably white should go for f4 here. This is objectively white's best move. The threat is, it looks like very strong threat is f5, so we're forced to take the pawn. And now 96, queen g8. We want to take advantage of this square. And now, okay, we're going to see 95 is the main move, but just simply to mention knight f4 and knight c7. So knight f4 is very easy to be parried. King f7. The king gets to safety, and we are a piece up. And then knight c7 is another move. But now we have this e5 square, so we can play knight e5, which is very good for black, with bishop g4 next. And here we are already activating our pieces. Let's say white takes the rook, then bishop g4, as promised, queen d4, and knight c6, attacking the queen. And then we can take the knight, and we have a large advantage because of now we have active pieces, and also we'll also have 2 pieces for the rook. So white is better off to play knight d5. And now these knights are getting annoying. There are all kinds of threats here. So we go bishop d6. We need to save the bishop. And finally, we are ready to take on e6. Knight ec7 is the only move here. And well, in this position, we can sacrifice the queen, but get many pieces in return. So bishop c7, knight e7, the only move. White at least gets the queen, king f7, knight g8, and rook g8. So I think this is the best white can achieve in this line. Otherwise, there are only cheap tricks, but they don't lead anywhere, and we will be just a piece up. Okay, a piece for 1 or 2 pawns. But here we reach a very materially unbalanced position. 3 pieces for the queen. For the queen and pawn, actually. I like the 3 pieces very much, and if we have time to coordinate our pieces, we're going to get a big advantage. So white needs to try to disrupt the pieces early on, and to give some checks and hope to disrupt the coordination. But I think black already is slightly better, and on the longer term, it could be much better. Black would be much better here. So it's a risky line, but probably this is the best white can get, and I like this position very much for black. Knight g5 is another option. Now we castle and bishop f7. So we're going to see this with the difference that white traded on e5, the pawns. Rook takes f7. Now again, a series of forced moves. Follows up knight e6, queen e8, knight c7, queen d8, knight takes a8. And this is a better version for white than the previous line with the pawns on d4 and d6, because the structure is defined and we don't have the option to take on e5 with the knight anymore. And here I like this move b6 to have bishop a6 ideas. In the previous line with the pawns on d4 and d6, we're playing b5. B5 is also possible here, but let's see b6. And here bishop e3 and knight d5. Usually in practice, white is trying to go for some radical solutions here to try to save this knight on a8. So that's why they go knight d5. Idea is to get a knight out with knight ac7. But now we can take the e4 pawn. We are threatening knight f2. Bishop e3, let's say, developing and defending the pawn. And bishop d6, of course, we're not going to let a8 knight get away. But in the meantime, we took the very important pawn on e4. Queen e2, white is ready to castle long. Bishop b7, long castle. Now the rook on d1 is very active, and white is hoping to create some threats. We can take on a8 either way, but perhaps it's time to take on a8. So let's say queen takes a8 with a very unclear position, but objectively black is fine here. Okay, looking at it, you don't really know what's going on. Bishop 8 is also possible. So as you like it. Okay, this was 95. Now let's see bishop e3. This is more precise. White wants to take on b6 and grab another pawn for the knight. We can go bishop a6, and this is the point of our previous move. We want to stop white from castling short. Knight takes b6. White takes another pawn for the knight. A b6. Now f3 is good to secure the e4 pawn, and white wants to go queen d2, long castle, since short castle is not possible. But even on c1, the white king will not really be safe. Here we can pin the knight with bishop b4. And okay, white has rook and 3 pawns for 2 minor pieces, which means some material advantage, but it's not easy for white because the queens are on the board, and the white's king is will be exposed even on the queen side, and we'll be able to create a lot of threats. So let me just show you a sample line. Queen d2, where else there is no other good place for the queen. Queen f8, let's say. Long castle and bishop c4. And the white king is not really safe on c1, we are able to create threats on the white king. Okay, this was d takes e5. And now let's see castle, which is the main move. And here we also castle. And here we have many options. There is rook e1. There is a4. These are basically the main moves. But also we need to consider h3, queen e2, d takes e5, and even bishop g5. We're going to start with rook e1. This is the most played move in the position. And it makes a lot of sense. White is reinforcing the e4 pawn and is activating the rook. And now it depends um, which line you want to play with black. Because we're going to see both e takes d4 and c6. So if you want to go the plan with c6 and only afterwards to take on d4, you can go c6 here. We are ready to expand with b5. Obviously, white needs to stop this with a4. White is stopping b5. And now we go e5. And this will transpose to the chapter with the move c6. So here we're going to discuss this move e takes d4. This was played quite rarely, so it has an element of surprise. But it makes sense because we immediately open the center, and now we're going to consider both knight d4 and queen d4, of course. Queen d4 is one of the possible captures. And white wants to play bishop f4 and rook a d1. At the same time, knight e5 is not possible since the white has a knight on f3. And here we go knight c5. Since we cannot go knight e5, we go the other way to c5. And one of our main ideas here actually is to go bishop g4 and then to ask white what is doing about the knight on f3. But of course, there is the move bishop e6 or knight e6. Those are also our ideas. Knight e6, if white goes bishop f4 or bishop g5, we can go knight e6 to trade this knight. And here we're going to see bishop g5, h3, and bishop f4. Bishop g5, with this move, white is preparing to bring the rook to d1. And it also contains a trap, because if we go bishop g4, which is very tempting to threaten bishop f3, then white is winning after bishop f6, bishop f6, and e5. There is actually a double attack here. So we need to avoid this. But of course, we can go knight e6, just attacking the queen and the bishop, and we're going to take one of the bishops. It is better for white probably to take with the bishop on e6. Bishop takes e6 is good. F takes e6 is not so good because white plays e5. And here the white bishop is better placed on g5. Unlike the other lines, the bishop is not hanging on f4. So we go bishop e6. But this looks good because it's a developing move. Rook 8 d1. And here it's useful to include this move, h6, to gain a tempo on the bishop. Bishop h4. c6 in order to control the d5 square. And okay, here white should probably slowly improve the position by means of h3, but I just want to mention that bishop f6 is never an issue here. We take, and after queen d6 we're going to have more than enough compensation for the pawn due to the strong bishop pair. So white has to improve the position slowly because he has more space. Okay, no light square bishop, but more space, and this h3 is useful to control g4 square. Now we go rook e8. We are also slowly improving the position, and we can continue the afterwards with either queen b6 or queen a5. And I think the bishop pair compensates the fact that white has a bit more space right now. It's a playable position for both sides. h3, this could be a bit slow. White is white was concerned about bishop g4, and with this move it's padding the threat. Okay, we can go c6. Now we want to go b5. White goes a4 to stop b5. Most of the times white will stop this b5 push because it's very annoying, and I would also do it. So just when I see c6, I would automatically go a4. And now because white wasted some time with h3, we can immediately equalize the game with knight ce4, knight takes e4, and d5. And because of this fork, we're going to take the piece back. If white takes on f6, then we take with the bishop, and both the queen and the bishop are attacked. So after this move d5, the position is equal. We managed to equalize the game easily. Now let's see bishop f4. I think bishop f4 is by far the most natural and principled move. And it's all about the pawn on d6. White wants to follow up with rook d1 and so on. And after rook d1, white will, all the pieces will be well centralized. But here we can see the point of knight c5, because now we can take a bishop with knight e6. It's good for white to take bishop takes e6. Otherwise we take the f4 bishop. And now f takes e6 is the better move. Bishop e6 is also possible, but not as good as before. And it leads to somewhat passive positions for black, but it's still playable. If you like this position with black, you can go for it. But f takes e6, and now white goes e5. And suddenly the position opens up, and it becomes sharp. And of course, every tempo counts. For now, this bishop on c8 is not doing much, and we need to see what to do about the knight on f6. I like this move knight h5 here. In a correspondence game, it was even played c5, but it's hard to explain why c5 is a good move. It works on because the position is very concrete, so it just works. But knight h5 makes more sense to me. And now white is opening up the position with e takes e6. If instead bishop d2, just to save the bishop, we can continue with queen e8. And I think this is fine for black. The knight on h5 is not in danger. White has no way to take it. So let's see, e takes e6, cd6. And now the most testing move is bishop g3 to keep the bishop active and put pressure on our position. I think it's good to take it. Anyway, the knight was on h5 on the edge of the board, so just to get rid of the bishop. Knight takes g3, 8 takes g3. And now we need to act quickly. Bishop f6, queen d2, and d5. Of course, it would be good if we manage to keep the pawns like this, but white is going to attack them anyway, and then we need to just push them. But now white has the e5 square. Okay, we have the bishop pair. White has the knights. We have more pawn islands, and these central pawns could prove weak. Ideally, white would like to block them, especially on the dark squares, like put a knight to d4, the other one to e5, bring the rooks on the open files. But we're not going to allow this. And also for white, it's not easy to attack these pawns. Here, of course, we want to develop the bishop to d7 to connect the rooks and go queen a5. Well, it's true, white has outposts for the knights, but also we have the bishops. And now after we played d5, this knight on c3 is a bit misplaced. White should probably reroute it, but then b2 is hanging and so on. It's an unclear position here. It needs some practical tests. Now let's see, knight takes d4. This is the main move by far. Of course, for now there is a threat of knight f5, but we're going to easily address this. And we go knight e5. We are activating the knight with tempo. Just to mention that in this case, knight c5 is not so good because white can play b4. So make sure not to confuse when to go knight c5 and knight e5. Okay, knight e5 now. And white has to retreat the bishop. And we're going to consider all the possible moves. Bishop b3, bishop e2, and bishop f1. Okay, bishop b5 would only play in our hands and would give us a tempo. So first of all, let's see bishop e2. This was played sometimes. It looks a bit weird to put the bishop in front of the rook. But white, for now, is controlling the g4 square, and later on, white wants to play f4, and with several ideas to put the bishop to f3 or d3. So the bishop will not remain on e2. We go rook e8, activating the rook slowly. And Later on, we can play bishop f8. And here we're going to see h3, f4, and bishop f4. h3, again, overprotecting the g4 square. And white wants to go for a setup with f4 and bishop d3. That's why he wants to have good control over g4. We just drop the bishop back to f8. f4, this is the plan. Now it goes to g6. And now it makes sense to go bishop d3. White is aiming for this setup. Then the queen could get to f3 and so on. This is quite an ambitious setup. Here we're going to play e6 just to prepare b5. And this a6 move is more flexible than c6, because after a6 we keep options to push c5 at once. So c5, b5, we have ideas there. Just like before, white is probably better off to stop b5. I would also do this. And here we can go b6 to fianchetto the bishop. And later on, the idea could also be to push c5. And black is having a good play here. Bishop f4, just to develop the last minor piece. Okay, we go back to f8. Now there is an idea to go knight g6. Bishop g3. Since okay, now the bishop will be less exposed on g3. And we can go c6 again, preparing a queen sortie with queen b6. Maybe in some cases b5. Okay, with b5 we need to be careful about bishop e5, but in some circumstances we can try that. White is stopping b5 just in case. Also, maybe he wants to grab some space with a5. And here we can regroup, knight g6. And we're already attacking the e4 pawn. If white moves this bishop, then we could have maybe bishop g4, bishop d7 idea, or even bishop d7 immediately. But yeah, if white moves the bishop, bishop g4 could be a question. And the idea is having, okay, for example, bishop f1, let's say like this, and queen d2, because now, okay, we can go bishop d7, but maybe we can also go knight h5 here to take the g3 bishop. So this is the point of including or maybe f3. Then we go back to d7, and we have ideas to go knight h5. The most played move is f4 here, just to expand in the center and get rid of the knight from e5. We go knight g6 and g3. The idea is to play against this knight on g6 to restrict it. And then white wants to go bishop f3. We go bishop f8, attacking on e4, bishop f3, as expected. And we can just complete the development with bishop d7. And we're going to follow up with c5, and then bishop c6, adding more pressure on the e4 pawn. And it's not clear what white achieved here. Okay, the knight on g6 is out of play, but all the other pieces are active. This was bishop e2. Now let's see bishop b3. I think it's a careless move. White tries to keep the bishop active, but is not taking into account our threats. And we can go c5. Not only we can go, but but it's very strong, attacking the knight on d4 and threatening to trap the bishop with c4. And now white's only move is to go knight f3, at least to challenge this knight on e5, so that c4 is not possible. For example, if white goes knight e2, then after c4 we're going to win a piece. If bishop a4, there is a6 followed by b5, and where bishop has nowhere to go. So knight f3, the only move to stay in the game, but now we can go bishop g4, and this pin is very annoying. We're going to, white doesn't have bishop e2, we're going to double the pawns here, and black's position is already preferable. So bishop b3 is really a careless move and is not good. Instead, bishop f1 is probably the most natural move since white played rook e1. And now we can go rook e8, a prophylactic move, just to have the option to go bishop f8 later on. And here we're going to see bishop f4, b3, and h3. Bishop f4 is interesting. So white is in no hurry to push f4, but instead white finishes the development. And possibly white's idea could be to go h3, bishop h2, and so on. Then f4 could be an option. So we go knight g6 before white has time for that idea. Bishop g3, and now c6. We want to play bishop d7 and then b5. It also bishop g4 here deserves attention to get control over h5 square, so that later on we can go knight h5. But let's say c6. White is stopping now this bishop g4 idea with h3. If a4, preventing b5 just in case, then we go bishop g4, f3, bishop d7. And now we force the white pawn to f3. And we have additional options like knight h5 or even h5, h4. So I like a black's position here. But h3, let's see. a5. Now we want to go a4 and gain some space on the queen side. The thing is, white has some space advantage in the center, so we want to counter this. Of course, white doesn't want to allow us, and he goes a4. But now we go queen b6, and the queen is very active here since white doesn't have bishop e3. Sometimes we're threatening queen b2, but we need to be careful about that, not to get the queen trapped. So, but also white has to consider it, so it's a bit annoying for him. And otherwise, we just want to complete the development with bishop d7, rook a d8. And it's playable position for both sides. Now let's see b3. The idea is to fianchetto the star squared bishop. I'm not so impressed by this idea. We just continue to activate the e8 rook, bishop b2, then c6, and this setup with c6 is fine against the bishop on b2. Queen d2 just to follow up with rook a d1. We can go knight g6. I mean, obviously white wants to play f4 sooner or later, so we anticipate this. Rook a d1, bishop d7, just to connect the rooks and develop the bishop. Now we are already threatening b5 to grab some space on the queen side. And if white goes a4, let's say we can go a6. And again, insist on playing b5. Because white put the rook on d1, so there is no a5. Yeah, and here we have useful moves. b5 is one of them. Queen c7 is a useful move. So it's a playable position, and I'm not impressed by the bishop on b2. White goes h3 just to avoid any ideas with bishop g4 or knight g4 tricks. And the main point is to expand with f4 anyway. Knight g6. We are anticipating the move f4. And now we also stopped bishop f4. This is the most flexible move, but c6 or even bishop d7 were possible. But let's see knight g6. And here there is g3 and f4. g3 is aimed against our knight to just to restrict it and then to play bishop g2. Bishop f8. We are activating the rook. Bishop g2. Okay, white managed this plan, but it took him some time. He played like bishop c4, then back, and bishop g2. Here we can go bishop d7, which is a flexible move, keeping options. We don't want to play c6 very early because then we lose the options to go c5. But like this with bishop d7, in the future maybe we want to go c5, maybe we keep options to push c6. So we play this flexible move and then we'll decide how to proceed next. a4, also white is making this move that is always useful to stop b5. And at the same time, white is seizing space on the queen side. Another useful move here, h6. Of course, it's important to control the g5 square, especially if we want to go c5, because then we don't want to see the bishop on g5, trading the knight, and then white gets access to the d5 square. So that's why we go h6. And here, if white goes b3, let's say to fianchetto the bishop, then the c6 setup is fine. On the other hand, if white goes bishop e3, the c5 idea followed by bishop c6 is fine. So in this line, I mean, this line has some venom. It's a strategical line from white. But it's important not to play c6 very early, just leave the pawn there and instead develop the other pieces like bishop d7, h6, and then you can decide what to do with the c pawn, because basically this move with the c pawn means how black is going to get counterplay. Of course, white can expand with f4, bishop f8. This is useful. We wanted to play it anyway, just to activate the rook on e8. And now we're going to see a4 and knight f3. Knight f3, it's a move back with the knight, but white wants to play bishop d3 and sometimes even push f5. And here, since we didn't play bishop d7, we can go b6 and just to fianchetto the bishop, and the bishop will be great there. Bishop b5, just to stop us from fianchettoing the bishop, but we can go bishop d7. And now white has to decide what to do about this bishop on b5. If bishop d3, then we can bring the bishop on this diagonal anyway with bishop c6. And if white goes a4, then we go a6, and white still has to do something about the b5 bishop. Okay. Here, instead of knight f3 or a4, I wanted to mention also that if white goes g4, just to push all the pawns, we go h6 to stop g5, and on the long term, this I mean, these pawns can be strong, but they can also be a weakness. But for now, they cannot go further. So a4 is always a useful move. And now bishop d7. Again, we shouldn't hurry with c6 because it's less flexible. Maybe we want to go c5 in one move. That's why we go bishop d7. We're keeping options of both c5 and c6. Knight f3. This move is aimed against the c5 push, because then it won't come with tempo, and it was recommended by Wesley Saw in his course. And here we go a6, and we want to go b5 because the pawn on e4 would be hanging. White, of course, doesn't want to allow us to go b5, so he goes a5. Now we can play bishop c6, again attacking on e4. Bishop d3 to defend e4. And finally, we can go b5. White takes, c takes b6. But now the a6 pawn is not hanging because also e4 pawn will be hanging. So white goes knight d4, centralizing the knight with the tempo. Bishop b7. Finally, we managed to fianchetto this bishop. Queen f3, adding extra support to the e4 pawn. b5 is, of course, a very desirable move. This is better pawn structure, and we improve the pawn structure. Now there are threats of b4 at the right moment. Bishop d2, and until here it was Wesley Saw's course 1 e4 part 1. And here we're recommending this move queen c7. There was a correspondence game, Timan against Malnar, played in ICCF 2018. And that game followed d5 with big complications. You know, they were playing correspondence chess. So they got this figured out. But the position looks completely wild to me. That game ended in a draw. But queen c7 looks more natural. And let's say white goes king h1, which is a useful move to remove the king from the g1 a7 diagonal. And now we can already force the matters with b4. Since we improved our position to the maximum, there is no further way to improve the position. We can just start concrete play. Knight d5, of course the knight goes to the center. We are forced to take on d5, e takes d5, and queen c5 with a double attack on d5 and d4 knight. Again, it's a very complicated position, which is fine for black. I only gave this line until here because it was in Wesley Saw curse. And just to show you how white is defending this pawn on d5, so knight c6, and then some interesting line follows: knight h4, queen h5 with a double threat on the knight and more decisively on the h7 pawn with checkmate. Now g6 is good, queen h4 and queen d5. And this knight on c6 cannot move because of the threat on g2. And we're going to take back the piece. So these are very interesting positions and very complicated. And I think black has good chances. And now let's see h3. h3 is one of the useful prophylactic moves. Rook e1 and a4 are the other ones. I think rook e1 and a4 are more useful right away than h3, but with h3 also there is an idea to go bishop e3 without having to worry about knight g4. And then if we take on d4, white can take with the bishop and have this option. And now, okay, depending on how soon you want to take on d4, we're going to see two options. One of them is to delay taking on d4 and play c6. And of course, we're going to see e takes d4. First of all, let's see e takes d4. If we don't want to play with a quick c6, we can just take on d4 right away. And now, of course, we need to consider both captures, knight d4 and queen d4. Queen d4 is possible. The idea is to play bishop f4, of course. Here we go knight b6, a bit more unusual. We are hitting the c4 bishop. Knight c5 is also possible, but then white can bring the rook to d1. So here you can see some difference compared to the other lines. The rook can get there immediately, and h3 is useful because black doesn't have the option to go bishop g4. So knight b6, and we're going to see bishop e2 and bishop b3. Basically, white needs to keep the bishop. So bishop e2. White is afraid of ideas of c5, c4, trapping the bishop. That's why the bishop is... okay, the bishop is more passive on e2, but it's also less exposed. And we can go c6 now to go d5 to take advantage of this bishop on e2. a4 is a move that really you want to go for it because now there is the threat of a5 with tempo. But it turns out that we're just in time to break the center with d5. And okay, let's say white goes e5. If a5 is the question, but then d takes e4 is fine for black. So white is not in time to go for this. e5, this gains a tempo on the f6 knight, and then white wants to push a5. However, now we have this pawn chain c6 and d5, which is very strong. Knight e8. This is forced because we need to leave the other square for the b6 knight. a5 and knight d7. And okay, black's position is a bit cramped, but we have this great pawn chain with the c6 and d5, limiting the knight on c3. And we'll be able to put the knights on better squares in the next moves. And for example, we can go knight c7, and then we can push f6 to undermine the white's pawn chain. So black is fine here. Bishop b3 is the more logical move, but now white has to consider this c5 push. a5, immediately going after the bishop. The threat is a4, and then to win a piece because of c5. So white goes a3 just to make sure the bishop doesn't get trapped. a4. Again, white cannot take on a4 because of c5, and we win a piece. So bishop a2. Now bishop e6. Okay, now it's good that we managed to get this pawn on a4. It gives us some space on the queen side, and now we're ready to trade white's strongest piece. Bishop e6, pawn takes, e5. White wants to create some weaknesses in our camp. Okay, if white doesn't play e5, we can maybe go e5 ourselves, but there are also moves like queen e8 or knight fd7. So we are doing fine, and also white has no good way to attack the e6 pawn. So e5, and now knight fd7 to keep the knight active. And I think black has enough resources in this position. A sample line could go queen g4, targeting the e6 pawn. Knight takes e3. White takes the pawn with check, because why not? King h8, bc3, d takes e5, knight e5, queen e8. We're stopping white's threat of knight f7. And here black has enough compensation for the pawn. White has a very bad pawn structure. And we also have active pieces, so black is not in danger here. And then let's see knight d4, centralizing the knight. Of course, there is a threat of knight f5, but white is never in time to do this because now it's our turn. So we go knight e5. We're hitting the c4 bishop, and the idea is to follow up with the c5. And here we're going to consider bishop e2 and bishop b3. Okay, let's say bishop b3. The bishop is more active on the long diagonal. And we need to act quickly with c5. Of course, white wanted to maybe to go f4, and then the bishop would be great on b3, but we go c5, knight f3. Now this is possible because the g4 square is defended. There is no bishop g4. And white has to go knight f3, otherwise we go c4 and trap the bishop. c4 anyway, knight takes e5, this is forced, c takes b3. And now, depending on where the white knight goes, we'll see which pawn to take, a2 or c2. So we're going to see mainly knight f3 and knight d3. Knight c4 also we're going to discuss a bit. But knight c4, we can take on c2, queen c2, and bishop e6, gaining a tempo on the knight, and then we can follow up with rook c8, and so on. So this is not so inspiring. Knight d3 has the idea to bring the knight to f4, and this makes sense. Because from f4, the knight controls both e6 and d5 square, so it controls some critical squares. And now we take b takes e2, queen takes e2, and d5. And we need to go for this break before white has time to play knight f4 and get a grip on the position. Now we have the bishop pair, and the position is about equal. If white goes e5, let's say we go knight e4, and it's fine for black. Just to mention that it's important that this knight is on d3, so that white doesn't have rook d1. So this makes a difference. And now let's see knight f3. This was played the most often. Also, it makes sense because white controls the g4 square. And here we take on a2. We don't take on c2 anymore because if queen c2, then there is no d5. White has rook d1, and this pin is very strong. So this is the difference. With the knight on d3, this was possible, but now white has rook d1, so we need to avoid this. So we take on a2, rook takes a2, and rook e8, a useful move. And we want to continue with a6, just to so that the a7 or the a pawn is not hanging, and then to play bishop e6 or bishop d7 accordingly is not so clear where the light squared bishop is better off. So that's why we want to postpone developing the bishop. And yeah, here I just want to mention that bishop e6 is with tempo and is very tempting, but it's not clear we want to develop the bishop to e6. So that's why rook e8 is always a useful move. And now let's see bishop e2. Um, the point is that we don't have c5, c4 ideas anymore, but we go for c5 anyway. Of course, now it's not possible to trap the bishop anymore. And here we're going to see knight b3 and knight f3. If knight b3, well, this is possible, but white knight is somehow out of play here because we have the pawn on c5. And we can just play knight g6. We are preventing, like this, we are preventing bishop f4. And of course, we can develop the pieces with bishop d7, bishop c6, rook e8, and so on, with an equal position. So knight f3, this is more, the knight is more active there. We go knight g6, again preventing bishop f4. And the same ideas are there, bishop d7, bishop c6. I like it very much, and rook e8. a4 is a useful move to gain space on the queen side. Now we go bishop d7. The bishop is heading to c6. It's also possible to go bishop e6, but somehow I prefer the bishop on c6, although it takes a bit longer. But on c6, then we can put pressure on e4 as well. Rook e1, bishop c6, and now bishop c4. Of course, now there is a fight for the d5 square, which is weak, but uh, we are controlling it with our pieces. And we go rook e8, just activating the rook. Here knight g5 is not an issue because we can go knight e5 and just defend f7 and attack the bishop. Afterwards, we want to continue h6, and h6 is another useful move anyway. So queen d3, let's say white goes queen d3 to defend the pawn on e4. And basically, there are no, white wants to go bishop d2, then maybe rook d1. There are no good squares for the bishop otherwise. h6, yeah, it's important to control the g5 square. And then we want to go bishop f8, and will not be worried about bishop g5. And here we have some ideas. Knight d7, knight b6 is one of them. To bring the knight over there, and then maybe to go bishop f6. But queen c7 and rook d8 is another one. And black has a good play here. Position is very solid. I don't see how white can further improve the control of a d5 square. And finally, let's see c6. If you don't want to play e takes e4 right away, you can first prepare it with c6. The idea is to push b5. White has to go e4 to stop b5. And now we can take on d4. It takes e4. The idea is to bring the knight to c5. Knight d4 and queen d4 here. Knight d4, again, white is centralizing the knight. Knight wants to jump to f5 if allowed, but we're not allowing it. We just go knight c5, hitting the e4 pawn, rook e1, and then a5 transposes to 7 a4 move. And Then there is queen d4, but after knight c5, again it transposes to 7a4. Other moves, there is also queen e2. Sometimes they go for this, and the idea is to play rook d1 and to put some pressure on the d file, but I'm not convinced by these ideas. C6 is a good move here. Also, taking on d4, knight d4, c6 is possible. But let's say c6 first because we want to. There's an option to go b5 now, and white has to do something about it. We're going to see rook d1. Well, a4 transposes to a good line for black, and d takes e5 also transposes, but is not white is not ambitious with d takes e5. And let's say white continues the plan with rook d1. Now we can take on d4. This was rarely played, but we want to open up the position and then follow up with rook e8. So knight d4. Just not rook d4 because b5. This is bad for white. White was not even in time to stop b5. So let's say knight d4. But now rook e8, and I like this rook on the e file, especially when the queen is on e2. And here white's pieces are simply misplaced, and black is already better. Of course, there is knight f5 here, but then we can just go b5 since the knight was not controlling the c6 square anymore. So queen e2 is not really a good move. I'm not impressed by this plan. Now let's see d takes e5. Well, this is possible. Sometimes white goes for this, releasing the tension in the center, but also giving up the fight for an advantage. And this pawn trade favors black. We take with the d pawn. Now queen e2 makes sense to play rook d1 because now the center is stable. Let's say we go c6 with the idea to push b5. White goes a4 to stop us. If rook d1, we can go queen c7 and then renewing the threat of b5. So a4 here. The queen goes to c7 anyway because we want to play knight c5 and have this e5 pawn defended. Let's say white goes for some useful move, h3. And here we have several good choices. Let's say a5 just to fix the queen side, but also knight c5 is fine, or even b6. There's nothing wrong with these moves. But let's say a5, rook d1, and then knight c5. And here black has good development. And the position is about equal, but of course there is plenty of play ahead, even if the pawn structure is symmetrical. We can continue with bishop e6 or even b6 ideas. So there is play here. And now we're going to see bishop g5. It's not the bishop is active there, but it's not such a good move. I don't like if I were white, I wouldn't like this bishop here. I think it's misplaced, but of course we need to take it into account. Usually it's a good idea to just hit the bishop and see uh, what is going to do. So let's say bishop h4 just to um, keep the seemingly active position. And now we can go c6, threatening b5, and white stops it with a4. a5 is a good move just to fix the queen side. And then we want to go queen b6 because white doesn't have the option to go bishop b3 anymore. And rook e1, just queen b6, putting pressure on the b2 pawn. And yeah, this worked because the bishop is misplaced on h4. So black is immediately fine here. And finally, we're going to see a4. It's a good prophylactic move. Stopping if we go c6, preventing b5 in advance. Sometimes white wants to go a5 to gain even more space. And here we have two options. C6 will be discussed in another video. And e takes d4. We're going to see e takes d4. Here, immediately breaking up the center, and we are ready to jump with the knight to either e5 or c5. Of course, we'll consider both recaptures, knight d4 and queen takes d4. First of all, queen takes d4, white is centralizing the queen, wants to follow up with bishop f4 and bring the rooks on the open files. But now we have knight c5, and there is this annoying threat of bishop g4, hitting the knight on f3. Also, if white goes bishop f4, there is knight e6. So now we're going to consider e5, rook e1, and finally h3, just to stop bishop g4. So as I mentioned, if bishop f4 here, we can go knight e6. Let's see, a5, seizing more space on the queen side. But like this one, white is not doing anything about our idea, so we just go bishop g4. We do want to take on f3 and then weaken white's structure. So white has to defend the knight with queen e3, let's say. And now c6, controlling the d5 square. And okay, now the queen on e3 is somehow misplaced. White tried e5 in some correspondence games. But after d takes e5, knight e5, bishop e6, black was fine. We bring the bishop back to e6 in order to stop the pressure on f7. Of course, white can try here a6. Actually, white has to do something quickly. And a6 is trying to weaken the pawn on c6. But we just defend with queen c7. Pawn takes b7, queen takes. White managed to spoil our pawn structure, but we have active pieces which compensate for this. So this was a5. Now let's see rook e1. Um, this move is part of white's plans. And again, we go bishop g4 if allowed. Why not? It's not clear what white can do about it. Let's say in a practical game he played knight d2, and now again c6. This move is part of our plan. Knight f1. Obviously the knight was misplaced on d2, and with this move white wants to reroute the knight to g3, and we go rook e8, putting the rook on the open file. And black had a good position in the game Areschenko Markush, played in Germany in 2024, probably in the Bundesliga. So, and then there is h3 to just tap bishop g4, controlling the g4 square, but we can change our plans accordingly, and bishop e6 is there. We want to trade white's strong bishop. And now we're going to see rook e1, rook d1, and bishop takes e6. In practice, rook d1 happened more often, and it makes sense to try and create threats on the d file. But now we can play knight d7. This is a typical maneuver to reroute the knight and be able to play bishop f6. Bishop takes e6. And here knight takes e6 is probably objectively good. In a game Libishevsky Guichard played in 2018 in Brest. Black took with the pawn, and after e5, rook takes f3, g takes f3, knight takes e5. Black was better. The game ended in a draw, but all this looks fine. However, white shouldn't go e5, and instead it turns out that after b4, white has an advantage. The position is still tricky. There are tactical complications, but this is better for white. So objectively, knight takes e6 is the better move. Queen c4, this is a good square for the queen. Rook e8, simply improving our pieces. a5 to gain more space. And c6, again, our typical move. It's not easy for white to attack the d6 pawn, since now bishop f4 is not an option. And we want to go queen c7, bishop f8, and so on. With a good position. So this was rook d1. Now let's see, bishop takes e6. White decides to trade the bishops anyway. Knight takes e6, queen c4, and rook e8. Again, a useful move with the rook. We want to go c6, queen c7, bishop f8. And this is similar to the previous line. Now let's see rook e1. This is also logical. White wants to play bishop f4 and bring the other rook on d1. Rook e8. We're also improving our rook. Bishop f4, and now we see again this regrouping with knight f d7 and the idea is to go bishop f6. Knight d5, white tries to get the bishop pair. Bishop f6, just continuing the plan. White also continues the plan with knight f6. Queen takes f6. And where we are offering a queen trade. But after the queen trade, the pawn on e4 would be under attack. Also the bishop on c4. So here white cannot really make use of the bishop pair. Let me show you a sample line here. e5, d takes e5, bishop e5. So white is already giving up the bishop pair. Knight e5, knight e5. And now we can play knight d7, bishop e6, knight e5. And there is a threat of knight f3, so white has to take the knight. Queen e5, rook e5, f takes e6. And okay, this rook endgame is equal. It's true we have a weakness on e6. Of course, this is already quite far. But it's just one weakness and we'll be able to defend it easily and then put a rook on the d file and get counterplay. And also it's important that the king is near the pawn, so we can easily protect the pawn. And you know, rook endgames, there are good chances for a draw, so they're very drawish. And this position is equal. I don't think white has chances here. Let's go back. And now we're going to see the other recapture, knight takes d4. This is the main move. Of course, again, there is the threat of knight f5, but this won't happen because it's our turn. And this time we go knight e5. We are activating the knight with tempo, hitting the bishop on c4. But now that we open the center, we need to act quickly, of course. And here we're going to consider all the good retreats: bishop e7, bishop e2, bishop e3, and bishop e2. Bishop b3, first of all. This is possible, but the bishop is exposed to ideas of c5 and c4. And we go for it. c5. Now, knight e2. This is the only reasonable retreat. Now white can go to e2 because there is a pawn on a4, and the bishop can go back to a2 after c4. Knight f3 is not so good because of bishop g4, and then we can double the pawns on f3. That pin is very annoying on the knight. So knight e2 definitely. And here we don't need to hurry with c4. The threat is there. First of all, we can go a6, and we want to go c4 and then to follow up with b5. We want to be ready to follow up with b5. White grabs the moment and go f4, not to allow us c4 anymore. If, for example, bishop a2, just to prevent it, we can play rook b8 and then b5 will be there. And once we get b5, I like black's position. We get a lot of counterplay on the queen side. So f4, knight goes to c6. It's much better placed here than on g6. And again, the plan is to maybe to push b5. I like this plan with b5. So after rook b8, we are ready to go b5. Also, another possible idea is to go rook e8 and bishop f8. And the position is balanced, but of course, uh, it's unclear. Now let's see bishop e2, controlling the g4 square. And white wants to follow up with the f4 and bishop f3. We can go c5 here, the usual reaction. And now what can white do? Knight f3 makes sense. Instead, knight f5 is not a good idea, in my opinion, because black can take on f5 and then go d5. And this, the pawn on f5 is not so good. And we managed to get d5 on the board. I like this I like this for black. And also, if white goes knight b3, the knight on b3 is going to be quite passive, out of play. Also, knight db5, while the knight can easily be attacked with a6, and then it has to go back to a3. Also, this is not inspiring. So what is left is knight f3. We don't want to trade the knights here. We go knight g6, and we have the idea to play bishop d7 and bishop c6 to attack the pawn on e4. Bishop c4, white is fighting for the d5 square, which is a critical square. And now bishop d7, just our plan to go bishop c6, rook e1, all very natural moves now. Bishop c6, continuing the plan. Queen d3 to follow up with bishop d2 and rook d1. And rook e8, we are activating our rook as well. And here there is an idea to go knight d7 and bishop f6. This was played in a correspondence game Höxter Caron on played in 2022, and it ended in a draw a couple of moves later. Bishop a2 is the most logical move. The bishop is not as exposed there as on b3, and it's also controlling this long diagonal. And here we are changing plans. We go knight c6, and the idea is that sometimes we can go knight b4 to attack the bishop on a2. Here c5 is too slow because then c4 doesn't come up with the tempo, so that's why we don't go for it. But knight c6, idea knight b4, also there could be an idea to take on d4 and play bishop e6. And here we have several moves for white. There is rook e1, there is h3. Knight c6 was tried, even that. And of course, bishop f4 looks like the most natural move. Rook e1 is always a useful move, including a piece into play. We jump to b4 and we attack this bishop. The bishop has to move again. bishop b3, let's say. Now we follow up with our idea with c5. Knight f3. Knight e2 was also tried, but again we can follow up with bishop e6. So knight f3 and bishop e6, developing the last minor piece. Our idea is to take on b3, but of course there is a threat of c4 as well. So let's say white takes on e6, pawn takes, and here e6 may um, look weak, but it's not. White doesn't have a good way to attack it. Um, the position is unclear. If white goes queen e2, for example, we can drop the knight back to c6. Or if white goes e5, then we just take this pawn, d takes e5, and the c2 pawn is weak. Then there is h3, a prophylactic move, controlling the g4 square. Okay, we just follow up with our plan, knight b4. Again, targeting the bishop, and we want to play c5 afterwards. And here we're going to see bishop b1 and bishop b3. Okay, bishop b3 is the natural move, but we just play c5, knight f3, bishop e6, and this is like the previous line. But it's a better version because the rook would have. It's a better version for black because the rook would have been more useful on e1. So h3 is a useful move, but rook e1 was better for white to have it. But then strong engines recommended bishop b1 here, which at first doesn't make much sense. Well, they argue that the bishop will be able to get out of there. And actually, if white moves the knight from c3 and then activates the bishop from b1, the bishop will be well placed. But I'm not so impressed with this maneuver. We can just continue with c5. Knight f3. White wants to play knight e2 and then c3 to bring the bishop into play. I'm just regrouping. We want bishop f8. And we have a non-standard position here. White has more space, but we're also doing fine. White's priority should be to activate the b1 bishop. Instead of rook e8, d5 was tried here as well, and it's fine for black. But rook e8 looks a bit more flexible. Knight c6. This was also tried, but I don't believe white can fight for an advantage after this move. Because it rather improves our pawn structure on the queen side. Now the c6 pawn controls important square d5. So the knight on c3 is restricted. However, in this game, white went for quick development, rook e1, rook b8. Of course, now we can and we should activate the rook on the b file. And the plan is to go knight d7, bishop f6 with good position. This was the game Burkic against Leon, played in Veli Losin 2024, and it ended with a draw. Leon didn't have any problem in this game. Bishop f4 is the main move. White goes for quick development. This was also seen in most of the games. And here we go a6, just preparing knight b4, and then follow out by b5. But we don't want to, oh, sorry, follow out by c5. Of course, c5. Uh, but with this, we don't want to allow the white knight to go to b5. So that's why, first of all, we go a6. And now we also want to see how white proceeds. So we're going to see h3, rook e1, and also briefly discuss knight c6. If knight c6, we just take. Again, I like black's position when if white takes on c6, because I think we have good control over the d5 square. White can try to open up the game with e5, but we just take, d takes e5, bishop e5, and bishop d6. And black is fine here. White doesn't achieve anything like this. Now let's see h3, which is a useful move. It's always good to have control of a g4 square. And here we just go for our typical plan with knight b4. And now attacking the bishop. We want to follow up with c5, and it's very good that we have a6 on the board, because white doesn't have knight db5. Bishop c4, let's see. Bishop b3. It's possible, but we can go c5 and then bishop e6 anyway, so it doesn't change much. Bishop c4, c5, knight somewhere, knight f3, and bishop e6. So this is the typical idea. I think it's good. You need to remember to include a6. And after this, we have good control over the d5 square. So this is not weak, especially since we have extra knight on b4. c2 pawn can be hanging sometimes. The position is about equal. White can try to defend the bishop with queen e2, but then bishop c4, queen c4, knight c2, rook a d1, and queen b6 to get out of the pin. White was threatening e5. Okay, white has compensation for the pawn, but nothing more than this. And we are a pawn up. Let's go back. Finally, rook e1, of course, is the more precise move. White is activating the rook. Also, this is more useful than including h3, at least on a short term. And again, we go for our plan, knight b4. And we're going to see both bishop b3 and bishop c4. Bishop b3 is natural move, but we follow with c5. Again, let me underline the importance of having a6 on the board, because b5 square is controlled. Knight f3, and just the same bishop e6. So this is like the other lines. Once you remember to include a6, all moves come easily. And here, okay, knight d5 is the move, at least to try to do something. If white takes on e6, then f takes e6, and black is just fine. So the only attempt is knight d5. And here it's possible to take knight f d5. Of course, this is desirable. And we're going to see bishop d5 and e d5. E d5, bishop f5 is good for black. Well, of course, the knight on b4 is a bit stranded, but white has no way to get to it, and then it's quite active. we are threatening here maybe c4, and then to target c2. Rook c8 is an idea. Bishop f6 is an idea. Suddenly, black gets a lot of activity here. So bishop d5 in order to get rid of the bishop, but we also get rid of the knight on b4. At the same time getting the bishop pair, e d4 and bishop f5. We have the bishop pair, but okay, the position is closed. We're going to put the other bishop to f6, obviously. Then prepare some rook e8 and so on. And on the long term, the plan is, if possible, to manage to get b5. The position is about equal, in my opinion. Bishop c4 is more interesting, and bishop is more active than on b3. We just go c5, the usual plan, knight f3 and bishop e6. Again, we want to trade the bishops. And again, the only way for white to fight for an advantage is to go knight d5. And here is different compared to the line where the bishop was on b3. Here we need to take the bishop on d5, since knight knight fd5, ed5, bishop f5 now doesn't work, and the knight will be stranded on the b4. This is a big difference. And also, if we take knight bd5, ed5, bishop f5, then okay, the bishop is white's bishop is active on c4. So then we are left with this knight on f6. So bishop d5 is the way to go here. Now e takes d5. If white takes bishop d5, then knight bd5, e d5, queen d5, queen d7 is totally fine for black. We like to get a position like this. E takes d5, and here, of course, the knight on b4 is in big danger, so we need to act really quickly. And b5, this is the point of black's play. We want to give up the b pawn, but get the d5 pawn in return. A takes b5, a takes b5, rook a8, queen a8. These are forced moves. Bishop b5. Well, if rook e7, we are fine after bishop, b takes c4, and we can take on d5 next. So bishop b5, knight b d5. Finally, we managed to get this pawn on d5, which was very strong. Bishop g3 and rook b8. And it's not easy for white to attack our knight on d5. Okay, now for now the bishop is under attack. With this move, with rook b8, we activate the rook. Then we want to play bishop f8 so that the bishop is not hanging there. Afterwards, h6 is good. And yeah, it's not easy for white to dislodge our knight from d5. So the position is balanced here. Okay, so these were the lines. Just let me recap. Let me get to the main position. So these were the lines with the bishop c4, bishop e7, and here bishop f7 doesn't work. It's just a forced line, and then it's almost, this is almost losing for white. Again, white can try to go for cheap tricks with knight g5, but after castle, bishop f7, knight e6, queen e8, knight c7, queen d8, knight e8, there is this move b5. Once you remember it, you'll get a great position. If white really wants to go for it, then there is d takes e5. But okay, black can take with the knight on e5 if he wants to make a draw, but let's say d takes e5. And then this works, all these lines with sacrifices, they work a bit better, but still nothing special. Bishop f7, king f7, knight g5, and here we can even be ambitious with the king g6. And I think black is fine in these complications. We can fight for an advantage. Knight g5 here, castle, bishop f7, rook f7, knight e6, queen e8, knight e7, queen d8. Here we go b6 because we want to play bishop a6 and stop white from castling short. Again, it's a very unusual position, but black is doing well. And okay, castle is the main move, castle, castle. And now white has all kinds of options. In this video, we talk about the lines where black takes immediately on d4 with, for example, after rook e1, e takes d4, and then black is fine in both queen d4, knight c5, bishop f4, knight e6, bishop e6, f takes e6 with some complications, but black is fine. Knight e4, then the knight jumps to the other side, knight e5, bishop f1, rook e8, with some very unclear positions, but again, black is doing well here. And a4 is a main attempt, but again, with c6 there will be another chapter, but here we saw e takes d4. Queen d4, the knight goes to c5, and we want these annoying ideas of bishop g4. And if white stops this, then bishop e6 is fine for black. And also knight d4. Now we need to reroute the knight on the other side, so knight e5. Bishop a2 is basically the main move and the real test. And here knight c6 is good. Bishop f4, again the main move. And here it's you need to remember this move a6. And afterwards the plan is very clear to go knight b4, c5, and bishop e6. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.